Do you ever find yourself asking the bigger questions? Like, how do we overcome injustice? And is it even possible to save the world? You can come grapple with meaningful questions like those at a free lecture this Sunday called Humility That Overcomes the World. You'll hear from speaker Mark McCurdy's, who will share a fresh look at Christ Jesus' teachings and talk about how the power of God's love can overcome injustices and bring healing to your life. This event is sponsored by First Church of Christ Scientist and is open to all ages, genders, sexualities, religious backgrounds, or lack thereof. The talk is at the Fluno Center on University Avenue. Find out more at christiansciencemadison.com.
Today on CityCast Madison. It's the Friday News Roundup, and we've got a special post-election edition to help you unpack the state and national results out of Wisconsin. I'm joined by CityCast Madison's Haley Sperling and WTMJ Radio and the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel's Kristen Bry. In case you missed it, local voters sounded off on the leader of our county's highest office and some big ballot measures on Election Day. Dane County voters elected State Senator Melissa Agard as our next county exec. Madison area voters approved a $22 million city budgetary referendum. And Madison voters approved more than $500 million in referendums for Madison Metropolitan School District. And of course, our county voters had a big impact on the U.S. Senate and presidential race. But what's the bigger impact? And how are people in Wisconsin feeling about another Trump presidency? We're digging into these questions and more on today's show. It's Friday, November 8th. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Welcome to the Friday News Roundup. The 2024 general election has come and gone, and we are here to read the receipts. Joining me today is the leader of this year's podcast, Haley Sperling. Hey, Haley.
Hi, Bianca.
And we've got a very special guest, Kristen Bry of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, WTMJ Radio, and her brand As Goes Wisconsin. We're so stoked. Hey, Kristen.
Good morning. Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday. Yes, and there's so much swirling, so many feels. I want to start out with the fact that you've been covering Wisconsin's political scene for a hot minute, and in a really interesting, accessible way. Can you quickly just introduce yourself for folks who might not be familiar with your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a Madison native, go Regents. I went to Madison West, but I was gone from Wisconsin for about 17 years, and I came back in 2020. I thought I was going to make a documentary about Wisconsin voters. Super original, I know. But at the time, 4 years ago, we were still a swing state. Thought it'd be interesting to try to document the different demographics that were going to be targeted in the 2020 election. Got back to my parents' house in central Wisconsin on March 15th, 2020, and the world shut down. And from that, I pivoted to what I knew how to do, which was make content. And started putting out content that was funny and digestible and more focused on Wisconsin politics in 2020 under the account As Goes Wisconsin. And as that started to gain an audience, I was like, well, I guess I'm moving back to Wisconsin because there's something here. And moved to Milwaukee into October of 2020. And then As Goes Wisconsin led to a radio show on civic media for a hot second, and it led me to being a columnist, a video columnist at Journal-Sentinel, and now I work at WTMJ with a radio show, and I still do some combination of writing, videos, radio, and basically I'm just trying to be a contributor to the Wisconsin political news conversation.
And that you are. Honestly, your videos have been so helpful to, I know, not just me, everyone on the team, and so many people in Wisconsin, because they're super accessible and you're just lovely. You just got a lovely energy. I mean, thank goodness for you joining us, because it's kind of an interesting, tough week.
Yeah, and I think it's okay. We had an honest conversation on our show yesterday, because my co-host for Spanning the State on WTMJ is pretty unapologetic as far as being a Democrat. And WTMJ historically more of a conservative radio station. We've had a shift in our lineup and the type of content that the shows are now. But we still have a lot of people who are in our audience who are conservative, who had feelings about us having feelings. And I think my co-host put it really well. He goes, I don't have to be apologetic for being upset today. My person didn't win, and that's how elections are, right? Like there is only one winner up and down the ballot, and if your candidate doesn't win, it's okay to have feelings about it. The important thing is we keep moving and we keep going. And, as I said multiple times, Wisconsin's got another election in like 6 months. So there's only so much time that you can spend and be upset about it, but you can't roll over.
It just keeps going. We roll forward, right?
The news doesn't stop. You guys know that. You still have a podcast to put out. I still have a show to do today, and
yes,
there's still news to cover, and there's still good news to cover.
Yes, that's so true. I was going to ask how you're feeling. I don't know if you want to share, but you certainly can today. We are a few days out, a couple days.
It was shocking to me yesterday as far as in comparison to 2016 when I was not really involved in politics. And that being the catapult to me being more involved in politics, or kind of like the change in trajectory for me. But being so gutted and devastated in 2016. And this time around, I'm absolutely sad. But I think I'm emotionally prepared for the fact that he could win. And the fact that by being so much more involved this time around, I think I see so much more of the highlights of where you can continue to work and you can continue to make a contribution and you can continue to lean into local politics, state politics. Because one of the things I think about a lot, and you guys probably know this better than I do, but 10 years ago, if you think about where Wisconsin was, if people were reading the tea leaves, they probably thought Wisconsin was going the way of Ohio and Iowa as far as becoming a red state, right? It was basically supermajorities in the legislature. Scott Walker was governor. The Wisconsin Supreme Court was very conservative. And you fast forward to what 2024 Wisconsin looks like, and we got a Democratic governor. We just picked up a ton of seats in the legislature. And like I said, for now, Wisconsin Supreme Court leans liberal. We do have another election coming up. And so I think it's a reminder as far as how these things ebb and flow, but only if you continue to have people who are advocating for the world they want to see.
I feel like the power of the fact that so many people showed and across all political persuasions has me feeling good. And Haley, how are you feeling?
I've more or less, I haven't been feeling that much. I think it's kind of just a defense mechanism. And I think now is kind of like we've mentioned, it's just a good time for us to just evaluate where we are and where we want to be, right? I think about how I'm feeling in terms of my own identity. I am a woman. I am a Jewish woman. I am a queer woman. Like, there are a lot of implications in this election that will affect me directly. I know there are implications in this election that will affect many more people much more personally. And so I take the privilege that I have also as a white woman and move forward and see, like, how can I impact my community in the way that I want to see us move forward in the future.
We heard,
like, to Kristen's point, I think I'm just
former chief of staff,
I'm just not as surprised this time around. There were a lot of parallels for me in this election that just reminded me of 2016. And as we inch closer and closer and closer to election day, it just became a little bit more clear to me that this is a real possibility that Donald Trump could win. Donald Trump won. And this is what we have now. And it's not just about sulking in the present. It's about planning for the future and how we move forward, how we protect our community, how we build community, how we build bridges. I think one thing that's been interesting for me to see it online, at least amongst my friends, there's a lot of, like, meme verbiage going around of, like, if you voted for Donald Trump, unfollow me right now. I don't want anything to do with you. That's one side of the coin. And then there's another side of the coin that says, if you voted for Donald Trump, I don't agree with you, but I do still see you. I appreciate you and I love you. And, like, let's see how we can move forward together. And I understand both sides here, right? I think there's a lot of big feelings happening in the days coming after the election. And for me, like I said, with my identities in place, like I'm kind of just trying to be quiet, maintain my own peace, and do what's best for me in this moment. And that is listening to others and moving forward. Bianca, I know you have a lot of big feelings too, right?
I do. I relate with both of you guys, both what Kristen said, just like 2016, we were told one person she was a dead ringer, and that was so much more of a shock. And it was always a close race. So I'm feeling a little less shocked. I think I'm definitely feeling numb. I think, yeah, as a Black woman, like I do feel there's a hurtfulness to this. I know lots of other Black Americans have voted for Trump, and I'm not someone to kind of share what my party, interests, where they lie, but I will say I worked in D.C. when the Charlottesville rally happened and the Unite the Right. And I know it seems like forever ago, but it's still very much on my body. And hearing the, president-elect, then president, say that there were good people on both sides, I just am really fearful of any embracing of white nationalism in any sense for everyone. So I'm hoping that is not the way. Obviously, we heard reports shortly before the election from Trump's former chief of staff, retired Marine General John Kelly, say that Trump said Hitler, quote, did some good things, unquote, and another quote saying, I need the kind of generals that Hitler had. That was reporting from The Atlantic, and it's just so chilling if true. Trump denies saying that, but The Atlantic did respond saying they stand by the reporting because they had two different people say that they heard him say that. So, words matter. And I am also a woman. I'm very terrified of people who are having miscarriages in the country passing away. It's a scary moment. And Donald Trump in his victory speech did say that it's a time to put divisions behind us and to unite. So we'll see, what that means and the consequences of this election. I did, before coming to record this, I walked by a woman crying. Could be totally unrelated, but I have a lot of friends letting me know that they're crying. I'm laughing again to,
we laugh to mask the pain, right? I mean, that was me, though. I was that woman on the street in 2016. In 2016, I didn't stay up to watch the election results. I was like, I can't do this. I woke up the next morning, of course, the news that Hillary Clinton lost. And that was, pretty devastating. And I remember I was a student at the time at UW, and I walked out of my apartment and I ran into my roommate on the sidewalk who had been covering the election that night for our student newspaper for the Badger Herald. And we just walked into each other's arms and just started crying, and like that was really hard. And I'm also like, when you bring up Unite the Right too, like I'm glad you brought that up. It's a horrible thing to talk about, but that was also one of the first political events of my adult life that truly kind of broke me, right? And that like brings tears to my eyes when we talk about it. So it's like, how far have we come? How far do we still have to go? I think that's what scares me the most, right? But there are still some shining spots from this election, and we'll get into those later too. But I do think it is important that we start off this conversation with where we're all coming from and how we're feeling, because like at the end of the day, like it's humanity, it's people. Elections are by the people, for the people, allegedly, and we got what we wanted. Allegedly, this is what the people wanted. Donald Trump won the popular vote, like pretty overwhelmingly. This is not a question of election fraud or integrity. Truly, like this is the people have spoken, and now here we are.
Yeah, and thank you. Oh gosh, I'm glad that we can be vulnerable with each other and humans, because that's hopefully the key to keeping humanity in our country and humanizing people and not dehumanizing.
And it's interesting because in the face of being the news, right, and trying to keep objectivity, I think that there's value in that. I've found that I am not necessarily great at that and I also don't think it's what my skill set is. I think my skill set is in explaining things, but also providing perspective. And if you don't agree with my perspective, that's fine. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to spread misinformation. But of the information that is accurate, try to put it in the context that makes sense to me. And I think there is value in that. And there's also value in people who are true anchors who just say the news as the news. But in this decentralized mediascape that we live in, I think people cling to vulnerability and humanity. And you're not doing your job because you have emotion about things that have consequences.
Yeah. Oh, so well said. And, another question that's before us, I think, is obviously now we have a GOP president coming in, Donald Trump. Will that have an impact on our cities, in our day-to-day, our liberal Madisons, more, liberal Milwaukees? Do we think that could have an impact here?
I think in Madison specifically, we're just going to see a bigger GOP presence in general. And we've kind of seen that in the run up to this election. It used to be the Republicans just kind of straight up ignored Dane County and Milwaukee County. They didn't do that this time, and they pulled in some serious money, more money than they ever have before. And it clearly made a difference. This election cycle, according to Cap Times reporting from our dear friends Andrew Ball and Aaron McGordy, shout out to the State House reporters over there. But this election cycle, Donald Trump pretty much boosted his numbers back to where he was in 2020 in Dane County with a polling result of roughly 23.4%. And so the Republican Party of Dane County's chair, their goal was to hit 24% of the vote in Dane County. So they're kind of inching up there. And I think that this is kind of just a starting point for them. We know that it takes multiple election cycles to change the sway of any sort of contingency. So I think that we are just going to see Republicans, at least in Madison, being a little bit more vocal, being a bit more out there. There are roughly 85,000 people in Dane County that cast their vote for Donald Trump and Eric Hovde and Republican candidates on the ticket. And I think we're probably just going to see them being a little bit more confident in their standpoints because they're guys in the White House now.
Well, we will find out. That one thing is true. Time will tell. Before we dive into any more news, so let's take a quick break.
This episode is brought to you by Etsy.
Oh.
Hear that?
Okay. Thank you.
Etsy knows these aren't the sounds of holiday gifting. Well, not the ones you're hoping for. You want squeals of delight. Happy tears.
How did you?
And spontaneously written songs of joy.
I am so happy. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, the song needs a bit of work, but anyway, to get those reactions, make sure everyone on your list feels heard with handmade, handpicked, and designed gifts from small shops on Etsy. Gifts like personalized jewelry, custom artwork, cozy style items, vintage pieces, and home decor to celebrate all of your favorite people and their specific kind of special. For original gifts that say, I get you, Etsy has it.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. So much of your personal info is out of your control, like your insurance provider that has your social security number and your favorite retailer that has your payment details. If they get breached, your information, your identity, is vulnerable. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
We're back, and we are going to hear a little bit about Milwaukee. Kristen, you're based there. What was the mood like there on Election Day and, when the results came in?
So I was on air. I worked from 8 to 11. We had a on WTMJ, we did election night coverage, and I was on as an analyst. And so I would say during the day, there was a lot of excitement. It was fun to be in an office and see how many people had their voted stickers on. It was interesting because I think it was similar in Madison as far as the lines for early voting almost every day were long at all of our 10 locations. I went on Sunday to vote early, and I had my daughter with me at first, and it became apparent. I was like, well, I can't stand in the rain in this line with my 1-year-old. She will not stand for that. And so I went back and voted later. And, I think regardless of how people were voting, it was exciting to see people vote. And it was exciting to see people be involved. And I will also say, which also puts kind of things in context, the vibe in Milwaukee was also a little dampered because on Monday, the news broke that one of our beloved aldermen had committed suicide. And I had seen my assembly rep was in the studio earlier in the day, and I gave him a big hug because Jonathan Brostoff had also been in the assembly before he was an alderman in Milwaukee. And so I think both in my circle, both online and in Milwaukee, that cast a pretty big cloud over, I think, people who were very involved in politics, because even if you were a Republican, I think to know Jonathan Brostoff was to appreciate his charisma and his energy and like what a civil servant he was. And so I think that kind of clouded things even going into Election Day. And then that night being on air and seeing, with every kind of refresh of election results, Republicans running away with it, not only in different states, but in Wisconsin, and even seeing as close as it was between Eric Hovde and Tammy Baldwin, of starting to feel what I had been feeling, which is what is real. And I think that's what comes back to most of this year. What I've tussled with is ever having your finger really on the pulse of what's happening, especially with national politics, because of decentralized media and because of what we all know, but sometimes forget of what corner of the internet we are on and what we see versus what the full scope of it is. And so I think for me, I went in with some optimism of stories of lifelong Republicans who were not voting for Trump this time, of stories of women who were going to split ticket vote from their husbands, of people who thinking that there was some part of like this women showing up that was going to be part of the narrative. And then it wasn't, and the narrative coming out of this, when you see, I don't know if it was New York Times or Washington Post, but all of those red arrows of across the country, people moved to the right. And whether that's as simple as prices and inflation, whether that is sides of the internet that Elon Musk now is puppeteering, the Democratic messaging not working. But what is really interesting is that it's not that the policies aren't popular. And so that, there's now going to be a reflection point, I think, of how do we have conversations with people who don't find themselves inside of this party and found themselves in this other party, but also like what was it that moved them to the right? How do you have these conversations? Because if you refuse to have them, where do you go from here?
It's huge. And I mean, one of the biggest things that we talk about when we're talking about this election has been turnout, like early voting lines, massive in Madison and Milwaukee. And I saw that Milwaukee County had a roughly like 89% turnout rate, and Madison's Dane County was even higher. And, even with these two very big blue strongholds, it just wasn't enough to pull the state in that direction. And so, I mean, what do we think happened there? I mean, you mentioned, like, is it just not the Democratic messaging not being strong enough? Are people just so upset about inflation? Is it people just being tired of the current administration? I'm very curious to get your take on that, Kristen.
I think it's that. I mean, I think if you look at this is worldwide as far as incumbent parties are losing everywhere. And this, I think I saw an article yesterday of someone trying to frame this as like the second COVID election because of the fallout of what it's done to our economy. And I think that there is a lot of people struggling. I think there is a lot of people just barely getting by, despite, all these leading indicators that we typically talk about when we talk about the economy. Ultimately, if people feel like things are really expensive, and things are really expensive. I mean, you guys live in Madison.
Yeah, it's real.
The wealth inequality, how expensive things are between health, like things that we need, between rent and mortgage rates and food and healthcare. And ultimately, people need something to point to and blame. And you can't just talk about policy and try to get into the nuance of why presidents don't control prices, because that's a losing message, right? You know what I mean? And so I think that ultimately is a lot of people feeling like, well, this isn't working for me. And you tell me to vote, so I'm going to vote. I'm going to vote with like my gut of what feels like the narrative and the message that is going to change something. And ultimately, at least in the presidential election, she didn't do a lot to differentiate herself from what the current very unpopular administration is. And whether that's fair or not doesn't really matter.
It's true. Right. It's very true.
It's very true. And honestly, like, I'm just so feeling what you said, Kristen, earlier about how challenging it is to put our finger on what exactly happened, because nuance is so important here and in so many different directions. So it is, I think we have to say it is the bread and butter issues. Like, it is ultimately like, how much money is in my bank account? Like, how secure do I feel with my family? And I just thought in that realm, like, it was really interesting to see Senator Baldwin. She got 4,500 more votes than Harris. So she outperformed Kamala Harris. But Hovde got 54,000 less votes than Donald Trump. So, here's the Democratic Party. Tammy did not as well as she has in the past, but I think part of the conversation was, Tammy has enjoyed Trump-Tammy voters, that people were splitting the ticket and voting for Tammy and voting for Donald Trump. And then it's like, well, Donald Trump is supporting Eric Hovde, but it didn't have the same impact. It just goes to show how complicated like people are really feeling about the parties and what are the deciding points for why people cast the ballots that they did.
I mean, people contain multitudes, and more than one thing can be true at once. And I think that's just kind of the big takeaway, when we look at what happened and why is it happening. And people are allowed to change their minds. Decisions can be made and then reversed. That's just how it goes, right? People are wild.
People are wild. We truly are. And before we dive into any more news, let's take another quick break. We've got to calm down the wilderness over here.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
The new Apple Watch Series 10 is here. It has the biggest display ever. It's also the thinnest Apple Watch ever, making it even more comfortable on your wrist. And it's the fastest charging Apple Watch, getting you 8 hours of charge in just 15 minutes. Introducing the all-new Apple Watch Series 10, now available for the first time in glossy jet black aluminum. Compared to previous generation, iPhone XS or later required. Charge time and actual results will vary.
All right, we're back. We've talked about the presidential election, the Senate. We should talk about the state legislature because that has had a ton of attention as well. So our state House races are particularly newsworthy this year because of our state's new legislative maps. Just a couple highlights. Republicans maintain control in the Assembly and the Senate, which, by the way, was not inevitable considering the new maps were drawn by Democratic Governor Tony Evers' office. That said, Wisconsin Democrats did gain really key seats in the Senate. So Republicans no longer have a supermajority there. And, I'm seeing talk and stories about, a possible hope for Democrats to gain control in 2026. Kristen, were you surprised by anything in the state elections or any kind of immediate outcomes from what happened there?
No, I mean, I think it seems like it's the same with the U.S. House elections. I feel like what was expected happened as far as Democrats picking up a lot of seats. I think there was enough toss-up seats for the Assembly that was an unknown, that maybe Democrats could take the Assembly. With the overall shift to the right that we're seeing across the country, it doesn't surprise me that they didn't necessarily. But it's also such a step forward as far as the bipartisanship of what I think will hopefully happen as far as getting things done, both in the state Senate and the state Assembly, not necessarily because of just the numbers, because obviously they still have the Republicans still have control of both chambers, but because there are enough seats that will continue to be toss-ups, in that the hope is that even Republicans who won tighter races, they know that 2 years from now, if they're in the assembly, or for the state senators who didn't have to run this time and will have to run in 2026, they're in a tighter race. And so hopefully they govern knowing that and govern being responsive to their constituents instead of just knowing that they're going to get reelected because they're in safe seats. And so I think with that, there's so much popular legislation in Wisconsin that's gotten no traction that maybe now it will, because the Republican Party now has to be responsive, or otherwise they might lose it 2 years from now. So I think that is the hope going into this next legislative session, that there is actually a more political will to actually get things done.
Yeah. Well, Kristen, this is so lovely. We're so excited to have you with us. You attended the RNC in Milwaukee, the DNC in Chicago. You have been so on the ground and also engaging with Wisconsinites. Like, for both of those, you had scavenger hunts, and it was so fun to watch that. You are such a good communicator. So thank you for blessing us with your presence. And this whole election has been crazy. Okay, we all know it. It's been both energizing, frankly, exhausting. So, if you could pick kind of a highlight from your coverage over this crazy ride, what stands out with you? Like, what are you going to think about from 2024 and years to come?
I think personally, what I think about this year is I got to do a lot of really cool stuff, and the opportunities of where Wisconsin lies in the political landscape every 4 years and how much attention we get. And the opportunities that we get to pop up because of that when you work in media. And so that I reflect on the fact that, like I said, in 2020, I was in my parents' house making videos, and 4 years later, getting the chance to go to the RNC, getting the chance to go to the DNC, getting the chance to interview some of the people that I got to interview. So I reflect on this year as far as the privilege to be able to be in the rooms and have the interviews and have the coverage. So that's been really cool. And I think my big takeaway also is not novel. And this is specifically from the RNC, because what I left the RNC feeling like was people are complicated. And I had so many man on the street style interviews during the RNC, and everyone was really nice and excited. And I'm leaning into, Haley, I know you were saying how there's kind of two sides of the coin right now as far as people who's like, if you voted for Trump, don't talk to me. I'm taking into that the opposite of, we need to have more conversations. We need to talk to more people who we don't always agree with. We need to do it respectfully. And I am still certainly an optimist as far as I think, for the most part, people are good, and that people, the information that they have, they do the best that they can with it. And I walked away from the RNC certainly feeling like that, especially with delegates. Politicians are a different game, but like people who were actually there as enthusiastic voters. And so I'm not as discouraged as far as IRL type work is really important. And I say that as someone who does a lot of stuff that is not in real life. But I think that's been my biggest thing, is the more that we can actually still get out into our communities and have actual conversations with people is good for everyone, and especially good for your mental health.
Yes. Get out, get up, get out. People are good. Go talk to them. Get out from behind your computer. It's not so scary. Y'all, this is beautiful. Thank you so much for rounding up the news with me this week. Kristen Bry, thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. This was fun.
Yeah, and Haley Sperling.
We'll do it again next week. Kristen, we'll have you back soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was WTMJ Radio and the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel's Kristen Bry, our executive producer, Haley Sperling, and me rounding up the news for you this week. And what a week it's been. If you want to follow more of Kristen's work, which we highly recommend, head to our show notes for a link to her socials. That's all for today, here on CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, your host. We're produced by Adam Sage, Noah Snyderman, and Francisco Kilgore. Haley Sperling is our executive producer. Our theme music is by Carl Christensen. Rob Thomas is our newsletter editor. Don't forget, you can always get more news delivered right to your inbox by subscribing to Madison Minutes. And if you enjoyed today's show, why not share this podcast with someone you know who's in the feels post-election? See you back here Monday morning with more news from around the city. Until then, take the best care of you and the people you love.